core connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is essential trauma and growth. And we look at trauma as a negative typically, and we get to define trauma in this conversation today. But good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. Great to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everybody else who is joining us. Today, we're talking about essential trauma and growth, and how, or trauma essential to growth. And I think it'll be a really interesting new perspective on trauma. But before we get started, we're going to take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, and creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and vigorously rub our palms together. Feel all that energy, that friction, that tension. And as you stop rubbing those hands together, just feel all that energy. Allow those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. So welcome. So let's talk about trauma. This is actually a really cool conversation because it's a new lens through which we can look at the life experiences that we typically relate to as disruptive, traumatic, destructive in many cases. And, you know, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about how any kind of upset holds the seed or holds the potential for transformation or for a positive effect. You know, we've talked about folks who have an extreme a health condition. You know, I've talked about the alopecia and how coming to terms with that caused me to elevate to a different level of awareness. And so when we look at trauma, we can consider it also as shock in the system. And when we have challenges in a system, even if you think of something as simple as breeze and weather on a plant that allows the plant to recover and become stronger, this is really what we're talking about in terms of trauma. And that it's actually, in order for things to grow and change and adapt, they get to be challenged. And when they get to adapt, then it up-levels their beingness, right? It creates a greater, we're talking beyond resilience, because resilience is recovery. What we're talking about here is something that pushes to a new level of being and awareness. Good morning, Gia. Good evening to you, actually, and welcome. It's great to have you here with us this morning. So we're talking about how trauma, instead of being something that we have to endure, what if it is actually part of the engineering of nature? Like, what if it is a fundamental mechanism of growth and transformation and evolution. So I was reading a book, and let me think what the book is called. Actually, I wasn't reading it. I was listening to it on Audible when I couldn't sleep. So let me just see if I can find it here. And it is called Anti-Fragile. And it was recommended to me by one of my clients. And so we talk about resilience. We talk about what's the other word? Well, the idea is we're really looking to regenerate. We're really looking to grow beyond where we are, not just keep the status quo, right? But not in terms of more, but in terms of evolution. Life is constantly growing and expressing itself in new ways, right? New potentials. And this notion in the book was so interesting because it was talking about not just personal evolution, but evolution of species, evolution of the planet, that when there is a trauma, certain of these traumas impact not only the individual, but then leave a ripple for the whole species that transforms the species. So, they didn't, at least in the part that I heard, they weren't really talking about, they hadn't addressed anything related to COVID. But if we think about COVID not only impacted individuals, but it impacted us as a culture, right? And it impacted us globally. It impacted global awareness and the way that we relate to each other. And it's had certain physiological impacts for us globally as well, that is shifting us into another way of even different metabolisms, right? So Rosalind says, is the nowness element attached to trauma? I think you might be taking us in a different direction, but let's see where you're going here. Trauma as in a foreign object. Do not pass go. Intense desire to remove what doesn't belong there. The initial stop and pause of whatever you were doing, as if the momentum comes to a halt to look at and deal with the foreign object. Now, not later. So Rosalind, it's really on target, actually, and thank you for that, because that's kind of exactly the dynamic that happened with COVID, right? It cost people lives. It impacted our way of being with each other. It caused us, the way we dealt with it, caused us all to stop and think and to reevaluate a lot. I think a lot of values shifted over the course of COVID that ended up changing the whole, our whole societies. So we might have looked at it as something that we wanted to eliminate, and yet it created a whole new dynamic that is now playing itself out on lots and lots of different levels. I mean, we can even look at it in terms of the economy and how it's causing us to be rethinking a lot of things economically, individual economic choices, cultural approaches to economics. All kinds of things are changing as a result of this mass trauma, right? Jesus says, please help me understand generational trauma and how could it be cured? Can it be cured? Oh boy, Gia, that's such a big one. First of all, Rosalind, thank you so much for that comment. It's really appropriate. And Gia, this is a great question. It's a great question because it's something that I've been really, really present to in my family. Generational trauma, generational patterns. And I think that the potential for healing generational trauma is first to recognize it. And when we look at human beings, you know, generational trauma is not just confined to family units. Generational trauma is look at the history of humanity and the patterns that we have endured, and also the patterns that different cultures have endured. And then we also have the same kind of thing within families, familial patterns that have persisted. And my thinking is that we get to first be conscious of them. I don't know if you guys remember 9/11. 9/11 was such a profound trauma on so many levels. And people came together in the face of that upheaval that would never have been together. There was an outpouring of, before there was the outpouring of hatred towards certain groups, there was tremendous outpouring of compassion and caring. And in the experience of the shock, there was a greater sense of unity, you know, and connection. So Gia says, how can humanity ever forget 9/11 ever? Thank you for that, Gia. I remember the experience of it is what I'm talking about specifically. Like, I remember seeing it on TV. A friend of mine had said, you can turn on the TV. And it was just horrific. And I remember going to New York City, and a while after that, and there were ruins from 9/11 that were in the train station as a memorial. And just the way that people was foundationally different. Like, their beingness shifted before it manifested as vengeance and hatred. You know, there was this underlying sense of connection and shock and trauma. And the trauma I'm talking about here is not just emotional trauma, but we have patterns of response that shift and change out of trauma, that create an evolution. And so back to this idea of family trauma, it's not an easy answer. You know, I think that the way that any trauma gets healed is first through awareness, and then through presence, you know, like cultivating a will to be healing that trauma. I don't think we heal by just time passing. I think I've seen so often where people have been able to sublimate trauma, and then what happens is something occurs that then triggers the trauma response, and they're right back in it, you know. So as far as healing trauma, family trauma, I've been working on that my whole life, and I think that part of it comes from our own journey of self-healing. And I'm reminded of a family that I know where one of the children died. And the mom and the dad never really fully addressed that trauma. They never dealt with it head on, and it never really had a chance to heal, and it shaped so much of their lives. And then years and years later, another child died, and it reactivated everything from the first child's death, and just leveled the family, just completely. I mean, a child dying is such a devastating experience to begin with. To have two children die, and just unimaginable. And not having dealt with the first death, they were living with that death ever present in a way that was not not life affirming, in a way that was in a denial sort of way, pushing it away, trying not to experience it. So it was furrowing ever deeper. And when the second trauma came, things just came crashing down. And yeah, trauma, it's really interesting. It is the healing of that trauma that is the transformative force, right? Or the evolution that occurs from it, that changes things going forward, right? So when we look at that in terms of weather adaptations, or when there are natural events that change geography, change coastlines, change some kind of trauma changes the way that like in our environment, we are having to adapt to different physiological circumstances where air quality changes or water quality changes. And when we talk about evolution, we're not always talking, not trauma doesn't necessarily just create beneficial results, right? I'm still digging into this whole concept, but it's very, very interesting to be able to be adaptable, to evolve with our evolving challenges. That's what we're looking at as being able to utilize these traumas as part of our evolution. Good morning, Jenny. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us this morning. And trauma changes the brain, says Jenny. Well, the brain changes in response. It's true. Like when we are feeling traumatized, we produce different bodily chemicals, and that can create different adaptations. And then if we procreate, then those adaptations get passed along in some way or another. And sometimes there's a trauma that occurs that is what I'm looking at is like that it's not just an acceleration of change that would have otherwise occurred, but it kind of brings things or pushes things into a new direction. So it's interesting to be looking at these cataclysmic kind of changes, like when a volcano erupts. It's changing a whole landscape. It's changing the atmosphere. It's changing the way, because the atmosphere is changing, it's changing the way that that creatures need to adapt and integrate with that environment, right? Yeah, and so what if these traumas are a natural feature or a feature of nature that is its own evolutionary mechanism? What if these traumas are fundamentally part of and essential to evolution? It's an interesting thing because we don't always respond negatively to trauma. Once we can move to a place, there may be an initial negative response, a die-off, or the feeling of being crippled, and then maybe we come to a whole new place because the foundation's been raised, has been actually leveled to the ground. We need to rebuild, and we rebuild in a way that we wouldn't have been able to build on the previous foundation. So that's where, we talk about Kali and destruction precedes creation, where the foundations of the old need to be disrupted in order to be able to create new structures. That's the kind of evolution we're talking about. So when I went through this whole thing with alopecia, I had to reconstruct myself. When people go through cancer and they reconstruct themselves, and oftentimes that trauma becomes the most enriching experience of their lives. Not the experience, but sourced the greatest enrichment of their lives. So, oh, Jenny, Bruce Lipton's awesome. So Jenny says, I was just reading about this last night. Bruce Lipton is all about epigenetics. Gabor Mate, who I don't know, talks a lot about how trauma experiences change your brain chemistry and perceptions, especially unresolved childhood traumas. Usually when we talk about changed brain chemistry and unresolved childhood traumas, we're looking at the changes as not positive, right? But it could be that these kinds of changes, like we get to, as we address them, as we heal them, we get to engage with them on a level that then can create new potentials, new possibilities. Gia says, I'm grateful for asking this to you. Trauma equals transformation, rediscovering. So beautifully said by you, Mira, as always. Thank you for that, Gia. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Jenny says, trauma causes pain. I think that by definition, trauma is painful. That's how we know it's trauma, kind of. And Jenny says, how is past trauma a good thing? So this is the gift of conscious transformation. When we take the traumas of our lives and we farm them for the gift that they provide us, that's part of our pathway to evolution, to a new state of being. And so for me, I'll just talk about the trauma of losing my hair. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. And as a result, I retreated from so much of life at the time, and also from behaviors that had been damaging to me. And ultimately, what happened was I hid, essentially. I wore a wig for a bunch of years, although I would tell people it was a wig, but I wore a wig for a bunch of years. And then eventually I came to a place to recognize that the reason that I was wearing the wig was because I felt ashamed on some level, and I took off the wig. And in doing that, I claimed my life in a new way. So It's not that the trauma, the event itself was a good thing. However, the cycle that trauma initiated and seeded has been one of profound empowerment. And so it's how we use it and how we transform it. And many people who have gone through cancer have a whole different perspective and appreciation for life and for their own strength and their own capacities. So it's not that the trauma itself is a good thing, but the adaptation, the change, the non-linear transformation that it prompts, that can be a profoundly good thing. And then you look at how the trauma impacts you, and if you're evolving from it, if you're moving through it, if you're expanding possibility and potential, then that impact ripples out to the people that you impact, etc. So Gia says brain change happens undoubtedly through trauma, but let's not forget neuroplasticity. We can use it for our benefit. It can not only help us, but so many others. Exactly, Gia, 100%. And Jenny says, I was just sobbing last night about how my childhood trauma has affected me and compounded with CPTSD, anxiety, depression, abandonment issues, emotional neglect last night. So Jenny, you're having a deep awareness of the trauma and the impact that it's had. And the thing is that also that trauma has given you a much deeper experience and awareness of so many things that you wouldn't have been aware of before, of how to treat children, of emotional dynamics, of the fact that you got through what you got through, that you're at this place of being able to be healing these things, greater awareness, greater perspective, and the thing is that when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to imagine how we can come to a place where all of that becomes a gift. Like all of that is shaping us to be who we are, where we are right in this minute, and we wouldn't be here without it. That's when we start to be able to move into the potential, for instance, to help other people who have gone through or are going through the same thing, that other people couldn't even be with them because it was so intense. You have lived it, so you have a presence around it that other people don't have. April says, like a branch on a tree can lead us to grow in a different direction. 100%. And welcome, April. Great to have you here with us. And Gia says, thank you for sharing your experience, Mira. Your examples for your life and your client's life really, really helps me evolve. Gia, thank you for that. I so appreciate that. I'm sorry it seems like I'm rushing, but I have a client. So I love you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. It is such a privilege to be with you. And Jenny says, I feel alone. My family invalidates feelings, avoids the elephant. Jenny, I hear you, and I have so much compassion for what you're going through and your courage to continue and to be here and to share so vulnerably. And so much love to you and love to you all. And I hope I get to see you here again really, really soon.